Next, UK politics is in a state of flux right now. The Labour government, which swept to power over a year ago with a landslide, is proving to be deeply unpopular in polls now. Back then, the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, pledged an alternative to the Conservative chaos to bring a stable, scandal-free, drama-free government. No drama, Starmer, some of the Labour-friendly papers called him. That's not been the script. One of the key issues has been the same that his predecessors faced, how to get on top of illegal immigration and how to stop the small boats coming across the channel from France has been a key voter issue that Labour has so far failed to get a handle on. The Cabinet has been reshuffled this weekend too. In the past 24 hours, it's ongoing after the forced resignation of this woman, Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister, Housing Secretary, who didn't pay what she was supposed to pay for a property. And for a government increasing taxes, it wasn't a good look for Angela Rayner to underpay her property tax by £40,000. The beneficiary in this latest drama is Nigel Farage's right-wing populist party Reform, the most popular right now, according to polls in Britain. It's all fireworks and celebrations in Birmingham this weekend at the party's conference. It is annual conference season for the parties. It's not a usual thing to actually see fireworks. I don't think I remember ever seeing fireworks at a party conference. So it tells you what Reform is trying to bring, perhaps a touch of the US, perhaps inspired by President Trump. Let's get a view from London. Let's bring in Sunder Katwala, director of the think tank British Future. Great to have you on the programme, Sunder. First thought on just the entrance, the fireworks, the celebrations. This is not what we're used to seeing, is it?
And this is new territory for Reform as well. Nigel Farage won 14% of the vote. The Reform conference wouldn't normally be one of the big conferences of the conference seasons. They've gone first. They're doing it for a day and a half. They're not doing it for a whole week. And they want to say, we're setting the agenda of British politics. And this summer they have been setting the agenda. It's been Reform as the populist insurgents, making the political weather. And it's been the government and the official opposition, the Conservatives in third place, responding really to how Nigel Farage is setting the agenda.
One thing that strikes me is throughout the summer, as you said, the saying that if you don't create your own narrative, the narrative is created for you. In the absence of perhaps summer holidays for some leaders or dealing with Ukraine for Keir Starmer, we had this kind of moment-by-moment commentary from Nigel Farage. I understand as well from talking to reporters in Westminster, they've set up their own studio to respond very quickly and very directly, not as one-to-one interviews through TV and podcasts, but just quotes that are usable for TV programmes. So a whole different operation. What do you make of Reform as a populist entity and also as a party entity in terms of its appeal?
So we have Reform at the top of the polls on 25% and on 30%. It's partly that the bar for topping the polls has got lower because you have 5 or 6 party politics. It's partly that we're very early in the Parliament. I mean, we call Farage a populist, and a quarter of the public really like what he thinks. And I think one of the imbalances of British politics at the moment is you've got great confidence of Farage speaking for his quarter of the public and a real anxiety from other politicians about how to speak for the alternative view, even on most of the issues that exist in British politics. Farage has probably got the minority position, scrapping human rights, not doing net zero and climate change, slashing public spending. So his confidence speaking for a vocal minority is in stark contrast, I think, to the anxiety about how to respond from the mainstream.
Let's have a listen to Nigel Farage. This is with his speech yesterday, which he brought forward 3 hours. He had the fireworks. Interesting, we didn't see the back of the shot, which because half the room was empty because he brought that speech forward to try and coincide with responding to the Angela Rayner resignation. But this is what he said. This was his pitch to the party and to Britain.
But in the middle of this meltdown of these two parties that have dominated for 100 years British politics, in the middle of all of this, there is a new, strong, unified party that speaks with one voice, that knows it's determined to put the interests of Britain and the British people above that of outdated international treaties or dubious courts. We are the patriotic party. We are the party that stands up for decent working people.
Now, he made a few pledges in there, Sunder. One thing to mention to you is that one of those was to stop the boats in 2 weeks. Now, stopping the boats are pledges the previous government, including Labour, have made, but they're still struggling with. And he's already backtracked, hasn't he, on that pledge?
We've had 6 years of this issue of the Channel boats, and governments have always said they'll stop it, within months, and, saying it will be easy. Farage's position is it would be incredibly easy if people just had the will. But obviously, when he gets scrutinised as to how he will do it, he will pass a law that says nobody's asylum claims are going to be heard. Well, the Conservative government passed that law 3 or 4 times. He might do something different to them, because he might pass a law and leave all the conventions and treaties, and then he'd have people, he'd need to have camps or prison camps or something, forever technically. So how to do this is a major issue. The other parties have tended to say Farage's plans won't work, rather than Farage is wrong in principle about scrapping refugee protection, scrapping asylum entirely. But people aren't necessarily going to listen to a governing party criticising an opposition populist if the governing party doesn't show it's actually got a plan, because it's got the responsibility to act.
The whole conversation about immigration, when you look at Nigel Farage, who's vocalising his thoughts and is doing well in the polls, and that appears to be one of the key reasons. Remember, this was a party that was very much anti-Europe, and clearly his position, Farage, in being instrumental in Brexit. But I want to talk to you about how the parties deal with the uncomfortable. And look at your organisation and look at the research and how it describes itself. It's often, your own British Future says it's trying to understand public sentiment. I think I'm right in saying develop messages that resonate with the, quote, anxious middle, those neither strongly pro nor anti-immigration. So there is something in the middle about how Britain is changing, isn't there, and how parties respond to that, and people's own concerns, anxiety about, and we hear this a lot, we saw it with the flag flying, didn't we, a cultural shift. What do you make of that?
Well, immigration is the most polarising of political issues, and yet at the same time most people are balancers. You have a quarter of the society that's very sceptical about all forms of immigration and wouldn't have refugee protections, got no sympathy for people crossing the channel. You've got another quarter of society that's very, very liberal on these issues. It's sort of wearing the T-shirts, putting out the placards for humanitarianism, for compassion, for safe routes, and most people are in between. But we've learned something in the last year, I think, because net migration has fallen by 400,000, from 800,000 to 400,000. It's halved, and nobody's noticed that, because asylum has gone up 14,000. So I think the last few months have definitely clarified that it's the visible lack of control of asylum in the Channel, brought home to people by it not being handled well in hotels, in the places they live, that is the dominant issue in immigration. It's not most immigration. Most immigration is visas for work and study and the health service and so on. But it's the asylum issue that is going to be the test of the government, not where they take the overall immigration numbers.
In the midst of the kind of, just go back a few days, we had Keir Starmer saying that this was the grand reset. This is the Labour government number 2. Now we don't know whether it's 2B or number 3 because of the forced resignation and government trying to get control of the situation. Let me ask you about the reshuffle and a key position here, because we have the 3 great offices of state outside of the Prime Minister, the Justice, Foreign and Home Secretary, all women. One of them, Shabana Mahmood, who becomes the Home Secretary, whose job it is to deal with the small boats. People say she'll be uncompromising. Tell me about how you think she would fit into the mix here.
Well, it's an unplanned reshuffle. They were planning to organise his economic team, and then they've had to reshuffle the whole government. They've done a dramatic reshuffle just to look in control of events and to move the story on. But it's also a decision to try and press the reset button, try and do something different. Yvette Cooper, the former Home Secretary, had a lot of experience and expertise on immigration issues, but Starmer, I think, is frustrated, so wants to change. He's worked very closely with Shabana Mahmood in opposition and in government. She's been his Justice Secretary. She has to do something very interesting as Justice Secretary because Labour had to let a lot of prisoners out, which sounds like a soft on crime thing. So she had quite tough, uncompromising messages, partly because the policy was by necessity, the prisons were full to overflowing. They were sort of saying they didn't want to do it. There's an analogy there, to this issue of the boats, because if you want control, you could scrap all the laws, pull out all of the treaties, declare all of your sovereignty. If you want control, you've got to cooperate with France, with the European countries. You're going to have a control and compassion arrangement. Actually, they've got a deal, a small deal, Starmer and Macron, that they hope, I think, to scale up, which is routes for returns. If Britain will take more asylum seekers and refugees, if France, and it might be Belgium and other countries in future, other EU countries, will take back the people who came without permission. Now, that's a new idea and an idea with promise, but it's a very centrist way, I think, to get control. It's not the same as the Farage populist argument of loudly taking control. It's actually saying that cooperating with other countries will deliver more control than isolation and sovereignty.
I'm interested in your personal thought as well of this split and trying to get to the anxious middle and the difference between racism, the difference between understandable discomfort. And I know from listening to a very interesting podcast that you gave not long ago with the Institute for Government, you talk about growing up in Britain, watching football matches in the 80s and seeing this outward racism at the players and how that changed in the 90s and came far more family orientated. Now, if you fast forward and we look at this summer where suddenly we're seeing the hotel migrant protests about where the hotels that they're staying in, and also certain areas where we're seeing the St George flag everywhere, the English flag flying, and the concern over whether this is pride or prejudice against migrants. What's your take on that?
Well, I am optimistic about my society because I'm about 50 years old, and so I did see it change for the better in the 1980s in football stadiums, in the 1990s in playgrounds, in colleges, in workplaces. Got so much more ethnic diversity in public life, leading figures and so on. But it's felt tougher. It's felt like we're going backwards this year and in the last 3 years. There's one big reason for that, which is that the culture online hasn't reflected the progress that we made in football stadiums, in workplaces, in playgrounds. The culture online, since Elon Musk owned the Twitter X website, is that overt racism is tolerated online. So, although there are fewer racists in my society, they're more visible, they're more vocal, they're more connected. I personally receive much, much more racial abuse now on a week-to-week basis than I did 20 years ago or 30 years ago. So that feels different. So it will be very hard for me to say young people we've made progress because they will rightly say, well, clearly not enough. So and that's affecting, I think, the political climate and the cultural climate as well. So it's important, I think, to say we do address legitimate concerns about integration challenges, about immigration, but the whole point of legitimate concerns was to differentiate people with a democratic argument and a voice and something that shouldn't be shut down from violence, intimidation, racism, prejudice that we should exclude. And so you have an unbalanced debate about legitimate concerns if you don't say what's illegitimate too. And we heard a bit of it after the riots from Keir Starmer and other people. Rioting and racism are wrong, but we'll have the real debate. We haven't heard anything from the mainstream this summer. It's very surprising for the Labour government to be quite so mute. Fly flags. I had face paint on for the England Lionesses women's football team with my daughters. So that's patriotism. But
it's a flag for everyone.
Patriotism, intimidation, violence, prejudice, and vandalism. Fly your own flags. Don't vandalise the Chinese restaurant because you're trying to be racist people. It's also, ethnic minorities in this country have always said if people don't think we're British, learn more of your own history. So I'm part of a group of people that are not going to let the far right claim a flag for fascism. For many of us, it's also the flag under which the world wars were won against fascism by armies that were incredibly multi-ethnic because of the Commonwealth and Empire contribution at that time.
Very interesting. I heard John Denham saying something very similar, former Labour minister, now a professor of identity at Southampton University, saying whatever the motivations, people are putting up flags that belong to us all, he said, that connect the nation. If there's a different reason for it, these are symbols that still belong to all of us, echoing what you've just said. And you take us right back to the top, mentioning Elon Musk, because added context here, Nigel Farage speaking today, he's taken to X, Elon Musk describing him as weak liquid. Not up to the job. Great to talk to you this evening. Sunder Katwala, director of the think tank British Future. Thank you.